Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 167. Step 2. Change. The whole class was chattering with nerves about the results for the finals, which they were about to receive, but Izuku sat in his seat much more nervous than any of them for a completely different reason. "Why are you so tense, Greenie? You kicked All Might's ass. Like, literally, a few times, I think." Hitoshi piped up from behind him. He spun his seat around even though he didn't really want to talk about this right now. He couldn't just ignore Hitoshi, though. That would be mean. Yeah, I'm not worried about... Well, I know I passed. Sorry, it's unrelated. He did his best to brush off the concern. "I'm assuming you don't want to talk about it?" Hitoshi asked. Not really the time for it," he answered. Hitoshi looked like he had something else he wanted to say to push the issue, but thankfully he was saved by the bell. "Once the bell rings, you should be in your seats." Eraser opened the classroom door as aggressively as one could open a sliding door and chastised them immediately. Everyone rushed to their seats before Eraser even made it 3 steps into the classroom. "Good morning. Unfortunately, there are a few of you who did not pass your final exams. So when it comes to the training camp in the woods..." He took a dramatic pause, and Izuku could see where this was headed. "Everyone is going," he concluded with one of those creepy smiles. Yeah, he had expected that. It didn't make sense to leave out the people who needed training the most. The whole class was in a frenzy, but he kept mum. He knew what the next topic of discussion was going to be, and he could admit he was nervous. He'd spent a large chunk of Sunday going over Eraser's notes on the lecture and crying his eyes out without an audience. He had known logically that there were other quirkless kids out there, but seeing the numbers was far more tangible than a vague assumption. The numbers were impossible to ignore. He was not the only one. He didn't have any feedback to give on the data. It was objective. But Eraser had asked him if he'd be willing to sit for an interview before he got it published. They would both use fake names, of course, but the concept had been nagging at him ever since. He didn't want to be a sob story. But if Eraser was actually capable of fostering even the slightest amount of change, shouldn't he be doing everything in his power to help? Didn't he owe that to his fellow... well, not fellow quirkless kids anymore? Even though he wasn't really listening to what Eraser said, he could tell that it was time. Eraser caught his eye and nodded subtly in warning. This was going to be a long class. "All right, everyone, we're shifting topics. Listen up." Shota started after sharing a glance with Izuku. "No time like the present. It has recently come to my attention how deeply quirk discrimination has affected some of you, while others may not have experienced it at all. This lecture won't be for a grade, but I assure you it is in your best interest to pay attention, so listen up. I put this together in a bit of a rush, so I don't have any means to test that you listened, but we will be having a discussion afterwards that will be graded by participation for extra credit. Those of you not comfortable with discussing can turn in notes for credit instead. If at any point anyone feels the need to excuse themselves, do not hesitate to do so. We will be covering some heavy topics that may be upsetting, even if you yourself have never experienced them. You will, at some point in your career, need to face this, but I will not force you to do so with an audience of your peers." Shota announced to the class, watching them carefully to gauge reactions. They were good kids, for the most part at least. There's a reason he hadn't expelled any of them yet. Barring the obvious, he didn't think any of them would steadfastly hold to quirkist beliefs. But society instills prejudice quietly. No one sneered like this was a waste of time. The sea of faces looked to be taken this seriously. Good. There are many ways that people can discriminate based on quirk status. Can anyone think of any examples? He prompted. A few hesitant hands shot up. He was doing his best not to watch Izuku too closely, but he was keeping tabs on the whole class, and he looked uncomfortable already. "Ida," he called, since, as usual, his was the first hand up. Mutant types are often the ones I hear talked about when discussing discrimination. He stated far less enthusiastically than he usually answered. He had a partial mutant type quirk. Shota wondered if he'd ever been discriminated for it. He'd never heard complaints about anything other than finding pants that fit him properly. His family status probably protected him from anything too rough. Maybe he should ask Tensei about it. He filed that away for later. Yes, that's correct. Any others? He prompted again. Ashido. I've seen people look down on others who have weak or useless quirks, she said, putting air quotes around the modifiers. That's a much more nebulous category, but yes, that's correct. Any others? Shinso? Shota was surprised to see his hand up. He hardly ever verbally participated in class, but he knew all too well that this issue hit very close to home for him. Villainous quirks, he stated plainly, also putting air quotes around the modifier. Or people who don't have quirks at all, he added with a little less confidence, shooting a glance at the back of Izuku's head. How much did Izuku tell him? He saw Izuku subtly look around at his peers to gauge their reactions, but no one other than Bakugo really reacted. He just scowled and looked down at his desk while he fiddled with a pencil. Yes, both very good examples. He clicked to the next slide, showing all of those examples listed. People with mutant quirks make up about a quarter of Japan's population, but are the victim in over 50% of reported hate crimes. Data on weak, useless, or villainous quirks is difficult to quantify because they aren't real categories, and whether or not they apply to any person or quirk is a matter of opinion. But less than 10% of hate crimes these days are not quirk-related, so you can imagine they make up a large portion of the remaining 40%. I'm sure you've heard the statistic that 20% of the population is quirkless, but that is outdated. These days, it's closer to 15% globally, and given quirks first emerged in Asia, that percentage is closer to 2% here in Japan, with the majority of that subset being over the age of 65. They're a rapidly dwindling minority, with only around 1 in 1.5 million Japanese citizens reaching the age to be diagnosed quirkless. However, this group makes up just under 10% of reported hate crimes, despite accounting for less than 1% of our population. People tend to brush aside this statistic since it's such a small minority, but there's still millions of quirkless people living in this country who are practically guaranteed to be the victim of a hate crime at some point in their life. He took a second for the class to absorb the information and glanced over to Izuku. He was wearing a mask of indifference as he watched his classmates, but Shota could tell he was uncomfortable. He told himself that Izuku said he would leave if it was too much. Trusting his word, he pushed ahead. I want you all to think critically about how discrimination can manifest itself. While hate crimes are certainly a useful statistic, they are oftentimes just the worst case scenario. There are countless mundane ways that discrimination presents itself, from accessibility to social stigma, and it's important that you know not only the laws, but the often less talked about signs of injustice. Things like profiling or job discrimination can be just as impactful to an individual or community as being attacked in the street. We've touched on accessibility and discrimination laws in this class, and we have a unit based on it next semester. So discussion on that can wait. Today, I want to explain microaggressions and other less concrete and technically legal ways prejudice presents itself. Let's start with mutant-type quirks, since that was one of our more tangible examples. Bigots love to tout the statistic that 43% of registered villains have mutant quirks, but countless psychological studies of both children and adults have shown that having a mutant quirk does not predispose an individual to be more aggressive. The 43% statistic is a self-fulfilling prophecy. A child who has grown up with the world calling them a villain is far more likely to create a villain than anything in their DNA. If you get called something enough times, you will start to believe it. This statistic is only fed by profiling and harsher rulings in court, and that is the responsibility of our judiciary system, police, and heroes. Whether it was subliminally or overtly, we have been forced to associate mutant and villain, resulting in over-policing and over-prosecuting people with mutant quirks. Each and every one of us holds this prejudice, whether we are aware of it or not, whether we agree with it or not. It is there, and it is part of your duty as heroes to recognize that prejudice so that you don't let it color your actions. As his presentation dragged on, Shota felt like he had been talking for hours. No one had gotten up to excuse themselves, and he still held everyone's attention, so it couldn't have been that long. That might be changing soon, though, because he was about to get into some pretty gnarly statistics. Circling back to the different types of people that can be discriminated against, I want to discuss quirkless discrimination. By show of hands, how many of you know or knew someone who's quirkless? A few hands went up. And how many of you know or knew someone quirkless under the age of 65? All of the hands lowered except for Uraraka. Uraraka, do you mind talking about this person? He asked. He had no doubts that whoever this person was had not been treated kindly, and the hesitant look in her eyes only confirmed that. But she continued regardless. No, it's okay. I went to middle school with her, but she was a year older than me. She was nice, she said as her gaze dropped to her desk. He noted how she spoke about her in the past tense. Knowing what he knew now, he could connect the dots as to why that was. He took a deep breath and shared a knowing look with her before continuing. I would like to remind all of you that you are free to excuse yourselves at any time. We are about to get into some upsetting statistics. Can anyone tell me what they think the leading cause of death is for quirkless individuals? Old age. Izuku responded with a soft smile, not bothering to raise his hand. Shota let that slide. Correct. It is old age. Can anyone tell me what the second leading cause of death is? Kirishima. Is it, hate crimes? You mentioned that, he trailed off, not completing the thought. Yes, I did mention they were statistically very likely to happen to quirkless individuals, and that is the third leading cause. He waited for someone else to raise their hand. When no one volunteered, he continued, the second leading cause is suicide. He saw Uraraka's brow furrow, and Izuku was steadfastly looking anywhere that wasn't him. The rest of the class looked suitably horrified. He noted that Bakugo, in particular, looked a little nauseous. Shota did his best to not be visibly pleased by that. Like I said before, if you are called something enough times, you will start to believe it, and our society places far too much value in quirks. They have become inseparable from a person's identity. Many people see the quirkless population as less than human, something incomplete or archaic, unevolved. If someone is told they are worth less for long enough, they will believe they are worthless and act accordingly. Every single category of quirk discrimination comes down to the fact that we are treating quirks as if they are people, and that is where we get the cognitive dissonance. People existed long before quirks did. Quirks are supplementary. They are a trait or a tool. You are a person first. Your quirk is secondary. I want you all to know that. Regardless of what you may or may not have been called, you are a human being with inherent worth before you are anything else. You are not more than or less than anyone else. No one is. He stressed as he looked over the class. A few people looked uncomfortable at the reminder, but he noted that Todoroki looked very confused. He had no doubt that the boy had never been told that he, as a person, was more important than his quirk. People suffered on both sides of the spectrum. All right, that's all I had prepared for you, but I'd like to further our discussion. Does anyone have any questions, comments, or even anecdotes that they'd like to share? No one volunteered immediately. He didn't expect them to. That was a lot to digest, and they needed time, so he waited patiently. Eventually, Uraraka raised her hand. Yes, Uraraka. I just wanted to say, the girl I mentioned, her name was Aoki Akemi. She was very kind. So many people were so mean to her, but she was always, her eyes went a bit glassy as she tried to compose herself. She killed herself. She was only 13. 1 in 1.5 million doesn't seem like a lot. I know I never thought about it before. And, well, it was too late at that point. I never did anything to her, but I didn't really help either, and I regret that. I'm not saying that it was my fault or that I could have even made a big enough of a difference in her life, but I could have, and now I'll never know. It's important to let people know that they matter, so thank you, Sensei, she said with a small bow of her head. Tenya passed her handkerchief as tears started to brim in her eyes. Yes, Uraraka, it's important to let your stance on things like this be known. I'm sorry you had to learn that the hard way. He was so fixated on her that he failed to notice Izuku was subtly trembling in his seat and wiping tears from his eyes. That was good, probably. Uraraka had no ulterior motive to share that. She didn't know Izuku's past. Hopefully this would be enough to make him believe that at least she would still be his friend if he hadn't taken one for all. Among many other reasons for this lecture, that was one of his main goals. Kirishima's hand shot up as he looked around the room. Yes, Kirishima. Chota called on him. I just wanted to say that I agree with Uraraka that's not right what happened to her. None of the discrimination is right, and I don't think I've ever said anything to make anyone think that anyone is any less because of their quirk, but saying it is important. What Aizawa Sensei said is right. You're a person before you're your quirk, he stated with determination. Shota saw several people nod their heads at that, and Izuku was looking around like he was about to tear his skin off. Maybe this was a bit much. Yayorozu raised her hand before he could lead the discussion elsewhere. Yes, Yayorozu. Didn't UA go on the record a number of years ago saying that quirkless individuals could join the hero course? It's upsetting to know that that may not be the case elsewhere, but it's good that we're leading the charge. There are a lot of horrible things happening, but there are good things too. We're making strides in the right direction by even having this conversation. I don't want anyone to feel like this is a hopeless battle. Knowing harsh realities is important, but it's not helpful if you let yourself get dragged down by it, she concluded. That girl was a godsend. Lift the mood. That's just what they needed. Exactly, Yayorozu. It is not a hopeless battle, and the more we talk about it, the more we can work towards fixing it. Ashido started excitedly before she cut herself off and raised her hand. Stifling a grin he had a reputation to maintain, he called on her. Have any quirkless people been admitted to the hero course since then? A quirkless hero would be amazing publicity for the movement. She cut herself off again as Izuku's chair loudly scraped against the floor as he got to his feet and hightailed it out of the classroom. Shit. He kept his face down the whole time, but Shota could guess what set him off. As much as he wanted to go after him, he was the teacher right now, not the guardian. You were saying, Ashido? He prompted her to continue. She was hesitant and clearly concerned, but she continued regardless. They could be a real advocate for the cause. Yes, they could, but no. No quirkless people have made it into the hero course. Not yet, at least. Silence fell over the room for a moment before he added, Shinso or Uraraka, would you please go check on Midoriya? Both of them had looked like they wanted to run after him the second he stood up, and they shared a glance at each other, having an argument via eye contact for who got to go. You can both go, Shota added. He didn't want to keep the class's attention on the subject any longer than he needed to. Thankfully, they both shot out of their seats and out of the classroom practically before he could finish his sentence. They were good kids. He was glad Izuku had finally found people who deserved him. As Aizawa's lecture continued, it became more and more clear to Hitoshi what Izuku was so tense about. There's no way Aizawa put this together without warning him beforehand. He could see Izuku's shoulders rising more and more until the tension got to be too much and turned into tremors. He wasn't surprised in the slightest when Izuku's chair hit the front of his desk as he bolted out of the classroom. He contemplated running after him immediately. Aizawa said they could leave, but something about that felt like making even more of a scene than just one person legging it. Thankfully, Aizawa sent him after Izuku anyway. Well, him and Uraraka. It seemed a bit overkill, but he was too anxious to get to his friend to argue about it. Do you have any idea where he could have gone? She asked the moment the door shut behind them. Not really. Should we split up? He suggested. No need, children. A voice chirped from an overhead speaker above them. He and Uraraka shared a look, and the voice giggled. 2 rights, and then a left, in a nook, past the 3rd door on the right. The voice instructed. Is that the principal? Uraraka whispered to him. Yes, it is. I promise I'll stop prying. I just thought you could use some direction. The voice, Nedzu, answered her. Okay. Thanks. He responded toward the ceiling. All right. No talking about secret shit anywhere in UA ever. Noted. I was keeping an eye out for this exact reason. Don't be so paranoid, children. Nedzu answered his thought with a mischievous chuckle. Okay. Not even the thoughts were safe. Cool. He'd seen Kaminari and Ashido's final. That laugh was not as disarming as Nedzu might hope it would be. Come on, Shinso, let's just go. Uraraka pointed him back to the task at hand. Izuku was sitting exactly where Nedzu had said he would be, and honestly, as creepy as it was, Hitoshi was glad he had directed them. There was no way that he would have checked here, and even if he had, he would have likely walked right past without even seeing Izuku with how much he had balled himself up in a blind corner. He had his legs to his chest and his arms around his shins with his hands holding anchor in his hair. It looked painful. He wasn't giving his chest enough room to expand properly through his staccato gasps of air. Midoriya? Uraraka called out to him, and he damn near jumped out of his skin. He scrambled nowhere as he was already as backed into the corner as he could be and looked at them with wild, unseeing eyes for a moment before he settled enough to register who they were. His eyes were glassy, and there were tears streaking down his face. Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. Aizawa-sensei sent us after you. Are you okay? Izuku looked over to him and then back to Uraraka before giving her the least convincing nod he had ever seen. Well, you don't seem okay. Uraraka pointed out the obvious. Your hand is bleeding, Hitoshi observed, gesturing to Izuku's balled-up fist. He heard him curse under his breath before forcing his hands to relax and holding them upright in an attempt to not drip blood onto the floor. Well, it was a good thing I was crying earlier. Sue passed me her little tissue pack, Uraraka said cheerfully as she presented 2 to Izuku. Ida gave me his handkerchief faster, so I promise I didn't use them. I mean, obviously I didn't use them. They're still in the pack. I'm rambling. Sorry. She trailed off. Izuku smiled at her fumbling. and Hitoshi wondered why he had insisted on coming as well. She clearly had this under control. I'm sorry, You don't need to apologize for having emotions, idiot. He cut Izuku off with some sage advice. Izuku actually laughed at that, so maybe he wasn't completely useless here. He took a seat on the ground next to Izuku so that he didn't feel like Hitoshi was towering over him while he sat in a corner. That was probably something he should have done earlier. Whatever, better late than never. Uraraka followed his lead. Did you know a quirkless kid too? Uraraka asked him after a moment of silence. Yeah, I guess, Izuku responded. Uraraka looked at him with a raised brow, no doubt questioning what Izuku meant by, I guess, but he didn't make any move to clarify. It wasn't his place. No one said anything for another uncomfortable bout of silence, and Hitoshi was surprised by Izuku being the one to speak first. Do you really think that about Aoki? That she didn't deserve that? He asked, barely loud enough to be heard, and resolutely not looking either of them in the eye. What? Of course I did. No one deserves that, Uraraka answered quickly and with no small amount of offense. Izuku started crying harder at that answer. Before, his tears were falling unchecked, but now they were enough to shake his chest, though they were still silent. Sorry, that was an overreaction. I didn't mean to. Yes, I did mean it. She was a good person. She tried again, more calmly this time. I don't understand how I never met anyone who... I'm sorry. Izuku forced out shaky words between desperate gulps of air. Uraraka was only getting more confused. He wished that he could explain it to her to get a little help with this, but that wasn't an option right now, so he just ignored her. Mob mentality. There were probably a few people who didn't care, but they were too scared to say anything. Plus, I don't think UA would let in a bunch of quirkus dickheads. There's got to be some sort of vetting process, right? He posited. Izuku didn't respond to his hypothesis. He just buried his face in his forearms since his hands were occupied by bloody tissues. I mean, I've thought about it too. I've been surprised by how different things are here. I thought it was going to be the same and everyone was going to... He trailed off. He didn't want to get into the meat of his issues right now. It wasn't the time for it. But they've been fine. Our classmates, at least. I haven't interacted much with anyone else. Obviously, Monoma was a dick, but it wasn't targeted. I think he's just like that. Uraraka snorted out a laugh at that and agreed, yeah, that kid's a jerk. I don't think anyone in our class would have been like the people who bullied Aoki, well, except Bakugo. I don't know about him. He's kind of a jerk too, Uraraka added. That comment prompted the first audible sob to fall from Izuku's mouth, though he was pretty sure that was only because it was a half laugh, half sob. Oh, was the kid from your school too? Did Bakugo actually? Uraraka trailed off, a little horrified. The kid was me, Izuku answered, peeking out from behind his arms to gauge her reaction. Her brows were drawn, and she glanced over to him for an explanation, but again, that wasn't something he could give to her. I didn't get my quirk until I was 15, Izuku explained. That was last year, Uraraka pointed out the obvious again. Izuku just nodded. Uraraka's expression went from confused to horrified to furious in less than a second before she shot to her feet. He did, didn't he? He called you on the first day of class. Oh, I'm going to kill him, she declared and started making her way back down the hall. Izuku went to grab her arm but realized his hand was still covered in blood, so Hitoshi did it for him. Uraraka, stop. Aizawa already knows about it, right? Is that why you were paired for the final? You were trying to keep him from getting expelled, weren't you? He stopped her and turned his focus back to Izuku. His silence was telling. Damn it, Izuku. What the hell were you thinking? He asked before he could think better of it. He's not... I couldn't just... Izuku scrambled over his words and gave up before he managed to say anything of substance. That's not... He sighed heavily. We don't have to talk about that right now, he said in hopes that Uraraka would let the subject drop. Izuku was already upset as it was. She reluctantly saw reason and sat back down. If he so much looks at someone funny, I'm punching him into space, she warned. Izuku laughed through his tears again. It took a while for him to calm down, but eventually his breaths started to even out, and they just sat there with him until he was ready. Once he started dabbing at the crescent-shaped cuts on his palms, Hitoshi suggested that they pay Recovery Girl a visit. He and Uraraka spent the walk talking about their plans for the summer, or rather, their lack of plans for the summer, while Izuku listened. Anytime he glanced up at either of them, he looked like he was holding back tears again, but he was smiling now, so Hitoshi assumed they must be good tears. He knew how often he himself stepped back and took a look at the group of friends he had stumbled into and thought, how the hell did I end up here? With gracious awe. So he could recognize the look when he saw it. They weren't going to let Izuku fall through the cracks again, not over their dead bodies. End of chapter.